They are actually on their way to the house of Mr. Hardcastle. But Tony Lumpkin deceives them by saying that that's an inn, a relaxation center, where they would stay and wait till tomorrow. So, Mr. Malo, together with his friend, Hasting, head for Mr. Hardcastle's house, thinking they were going to an inn. So they get there, they knock at the door, Mr. Hardcastle comes in, they insult the young man, they make jokes, not knowing that he is in the house of his would-be father-in-law. And so he continues in his life of troublemaking, being rude, asking the man to pull his shoes. That's the only law to be unknown to him. And of course insisting that he is going to check out his bed upstairs if it is properly dressed. And so while he does so, Kate, the girl, sorry, not Kate now, Constance, who is the half-sister to Kate, comes into the room and finds Mr. Hasting. And Mr. Hasting, that's a friend of Malo, begins to wonder what this young Constance Neville is doing in an inn. And Constance Neville reveals that this is not an inn, and this is the house of Mr. Hardcastle. And now the balloon has been burst. Something is about going to happen. If Mr. Malo finds out, he's likely going to run away, and then the idea of getting married to Kate would have been stalled. And so Hastings goes into an agreement with Constance. Let us not allow Malo to know about this. Let us just allow him to go with the belief that this is an inn, please. That guy is very rude. If he finds out, he's going to get angry, and that will be the end of this show. And so Mr. Hastings and Constance play along, and the play continues. And of course, when Hardcastle eventually sees Kate dressed in the way she is dressed, very beautiful girl from a high-class family, Mr. Malo does not say any word to her, because we are told that Mr. Malo rather, is shy whenever he finds himself around females that are of high class. He likes them, but he doesn't talk to them because of his timid nature. And of course, Lady Hardcastle goes to report to the dad that this young man, who is supposed to be my husband, he's too shy and timid for my liking, and I don't like him for that. And the father says, don't worry, relax, we shall get to the bottom of this at the end of the day. And so because of this, the young lady goes in to dress like a maid, so that perhaps she will attract the attention of Mr. Malo. And when Mr. Malo sees her dressed like a maid in an inn, Mr. Malo goes for her and begins to woo her. And everyone is surprised. And eventually, the play continues in that manner. And of course, stops there and takes us to the subplots of the play. That is the relationship between Hasting and Constance Neville. Now, for Constance Neville, of course, but before that, Hardcastle, that's the owner of the supposed inn, gets to meet Mr. Malo trying to kiss the daughter Kate. And so he becomes angry and threatens to send Mr. Malo out of his house, and reveals to him that this is Mr. Hardcastle's home, and Mr. Malo is disappointed and is set to leave the house of Mr. Hardcastle. So the play pauses there and takes us to the relationship between Constance Neville and Hasting. And don't forget that Hasting is the companion of Mr. Malo. And so Constance, who is the daughter of Mrs. Hardcastle, has her jewel, whole lot of jewel that when translated into money, it's a whole lot of money kept for her by the mother, Mrs. Hardcastle, and that the mother is going to give those jewelries to her whenever she gets married. And the mother is interested in, not the mother now, it's not the mother, she should be the guardian, because the mother, because Mrs. Hardcastle has a son called Tony Lumpkin. So Tony Lumpkin becomes the half-brother to Miss Hardcastle, and that is Lady Kate. So Mrs. Hardcastle is interested in Tony Lumpkin getting married to Constance Neville, so that all whatever belongs to Constant Neville would equally be extended to Tony Lumpkin, his son. And so he wants to keep all of those things intact for Constant Neville until Constant Neville agrees to marry Tony Lumpkin. But the reality that both Tony Lumpkin and Constant Neville hate each other. They're not interested in that matchmaking of Mrs. Hardcastle. And so Mrs. Hardcastle's plan fails because Constant Neville is not interested in Tony Lumpkin, neither is Tony Lumpkin interested in Constant Neville. And so the story continues. Now, to make sure that he reveals his hatred for Constant Neville, and of course makes it clear that he's not interested in their marriage, Tony Lumpkin steals the jewelries belonging to Constant Neville, hidden by his mother, steals them and gives it to Malo. Sorry, gives it to Hasting. Hasting gathers whatever was given to him and gives it to his friend Malo. And Malo, thinking that Mrs. Constant Neville is just a worker in the inn, gives the entire jewelry that was stolen from Mrs. Hardcastle back to Mrs. Hardcastle for safekeeping. So when the stolen jewelry gets to Mrs. Hardcastle, she discovers that indeed there is a plot for Constant Neville and Tony Lumpkin to elope. And so she decides to send Constant Neville away. And so she employs rather the help of Tony Lumpkin to take both her, that's Mrs. Hardcastle, and Constant Neville to a friend's place away from the country. And so instead of doing that, Tony Lumpkin carries them and continues to go around the compound of Mr. Hardcastle throughout the night until he comes to their garden and parks them there without taking them exactly to their location. And so Mrs. Hardcastle is angry and is no longer interested in stopping these two persons. And eventually it is revealed that Tony Lumpkin is not interested in Miss Constant Neville, and because of that, all whatever belongs to Constant Neville is given back to Constant Neville, and Tony Lumpkin is allowed to become free. Hence, Constant Neville gets married to her dream man, that is Hasting, the companion of Mr. Malo. And eventually, Mr. Malo himself gets married to Kate, that is Miss Hardcastle. And of course, the play ends on the note of these two persons getting married. I mean, Hastings getting married to Constant Neville, and Tony Lumpkin, sorry, not Tony Lumpkin now, Mr. Malo getting married to Kate. And that is it about the plot of Oliver Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer. One may begin to wonder how the story is titled She Stoops to Conquer. The lady, in fact, who stooped, as it were, to conquer is Lady Kate. She had to dress like a maid. That was what they refer, or what is referred to as committing class suicide. She had to commit class suicide. And when she did commit that class suicide, it becomes easy for her to conquer. And what did she conquer? She conquered the fear in Mr. Malo. And Mr. Malo eventually gets married to her. Talking about the theme of this work, and of course I'm sure you know that, as I've said in our last class, that the theme of any work has got to do with the message, the importance, the significance of a story. So we'll talk about three themes. One is appearance and reality. The next is class and class bias, followed by deceit and trickery. Let's start with appearance and reality. The house of Mr. Hardcastle appeared to be an inn, but the reality is that it is the home of Mr. Hardcastle. And of course, Mr. Malo and of course Hastings are on their way to the house of Mr. Hardcastle, but are deceived to think that Mr. Hardcastle's house is an inn, and so they mistake it for an inn, only to realize later that in reality the house of Mr. Hardcastle is not an inn, but a very big mansion belonging to a very wealthy man Mr. Hackerson. And of course, again, Miss Hackerson, that is Lady Kate, appears to be a maid, but in reality, she is the daughter of the well-known Mr. Hackerson. And that is it for appearance and reality. And of course, some of the appearances in that work, that's in Oliver Goldsmith's History to Conquer, are carefully knitted together to lead to reality. The next is class and class bias. We are told in the story that Mr. Malo likes girls of high class, but hates girls that are coming from the low class. And that is why when he sees Lady Kate from the beginning appearing as a high class lady, he likes Lady Kate. But because he is timid, he lacks whatever effort he needs to talk to Lady Kate. And of course, that brings us to the theme of class and class bias. And come to even think of it, the fact that Mr. Hackerson agrees to the marriage between the daughter and of course Mr. Malo is because he knows the father of Mr. Malo, that is Charles Malo, and that the two of them belong to the same class. And so he agrees to the marriage of these two young people. And that is it for class and class bias. The next is deceit and trickery. And this appears to me to be the most prominent of the themes in this work. Of course, the play is standing on the theme of deceit and trickery. From the beginning of the play, when Mr. Malo and Hastings meet Tony Lumpkin in the Three Pigeon Tavern, Tony Lumpkin deceives them, telling them to go to an inn. Unknown to these young men, they are headed for the house of Mr. Hackerson. Another trickery and deceit is that of Tony Lumpkin, the one he plays on both Mrs. Hackerson and Constance Neville, in driving them around the house of Mr. Hackerson instead of taking them to where Mrs. Hackerson had ordered him to take them to. Drive them around the compound and drop them somewhere at the garden to when they were exhausted and totally spent. So that's trickery from Tony Lumpkin. And that is it for the theme. The next thing that will engage us now is the characterization. I did tell you that characters in the work of art are elements who people the work of art. Elements that people the work of art are referred to characters. And characterization is what the playwright or the author or the novelist in the case of a prose makes these characters do. The first is Sir Charles Malo, almost a minor character, and that's the father of young Charles Malo, who actually is a very good friend of Mr. Hackerson. I think they met, according to the story, during the war. They were soldiers during the war, so they became friends. The next character is young Charles Malo, who arguably is the main character in that work. He is the character who is on his way with his friend, Mr. Hastings, to the house of Mr. Hackerson in a project to marry Kate Hackerson. The next character is Mr. Hackerson, and we know Mr. Hackerson is the father of Miss Hackerson and the husband of Mrs. Hackerson. And he is a very level-headed man who loves the daughter very well, and of course who is a stickler for rule, because he would insist that the daughter should be dressed in a particular way before him. So from that we conclude that Mr. Hackerson is a pedantist, a stickler for rule. The next character is George Hasting, very close companion of young Charles, of young Malo. Okay, the next character is Tony Lumpkin, the trickster, the tortoise, and the anante in that work. He is the one that pulls the trick on young Malo and of course Hastings, and have them go to the house of their would-be father-in-law and behave like rude boys and attracted shame on themselves. It was Tony Lumpkin that pulled that trick. The next character is Miss Dorothy Hardcastle. And of course, we know that's the wife of Mr. Hardcastle. The other character is Miss Kate Hardcastle, the girl in the center of the story, who Mr. Malo is interested in. I mean, young Malo. The next other character is Miss Constance Neville. Miss Constance Neville is the girl who Mrs. Hardcastle wants her son, Tony Lumpkin, to marry because of the wealth the girl has kept for her under her custody. And so Mrs. Hardcastle plots to have both Tony Lumpkin and Constance Neville married. But of course, the two of them do not like each other. And so the plan of Mrs. Hardcastle is truncated, and Mr. Constance Neville gets married instead to George Hasting, the companion of Malo. Now, talk about style. Of course, you know, style is a peculiar way an author or a playwright has decided to go about his work. In the case of She Stood to Conquer, we have satire. Of course, the work is used to expose some of the ills in the then aristocratic society. The next is the three unities, that the unity of time, place, and action. Talking about the unity of time, the play takes place throughout the night, and so achieve the unity of time. Talking about the unity of action, if not for the subplot of Tony of Hastings and of course Constance Neville, the play achieves unity of action because the action is between Miss Kate Hardcastle and of course young Malo, except for the subplot of not Tony Lumpkin, of Hastings and Constance Neville. So one would say in a way that the play achieves unity of action. The next is the plot. The plot is a simple straight plot. So we would say that the play achieves the three unities of place, time, and of course action. Talking about place, the play takes place in the mansion of Mr. Hardcastle. A whole lot of them, of course, we know that the play, some actions take place in the Three Pigeon house, but of course virtually all of the action take place in Mr. Hardcastle's mansion. So in that way, one may conclude that the play achieves unity of place. The next is dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is a device where the character in the play do not know some of the things. Some of the characters in the play do not know some of the things the audience or the viewers or the readers are aware of. As you read the work, you are aware that that Mr. Malo and Hastings are in the house of Mr. Hardcastle, but the both parties, that's Hastings and Malo, do not know that they are in the house of Mr. Hardcastle. For them, they are in an inn, and so they play and throw themselves around. But you, the reader, you are sufficiently aware that they are in the house of Mr. Hardcastle, and such device actually brings about laughter. It actually makes you to laugh because you know what the characters do not know. And that is it for Oliver Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer, that was initially titled The Event of the Night, the event of the night, but of course the play comes out as She Stooped to Conquer.